Hello, I'm back. Glaciers are mass of flowing ice that are accumulated on land in areas where snowfall exceeds the annual loss of snow due to melting. These snow are accumulated in the form of hexagonal ice crystals which form integrate beauty and variety. Glaciers can form over a year when more ice piles up than melts. Soon after falling, snow becomes to be denser and more tightly packed. When new snow falls and buries the previous year's snow, the bottom layer becomes even more compressed. Dense, grainy ice that survives 1 year melt cycle is called firn. When the ice grows thick enough, the firn grains diffuse into a huge mass called glacial ice. After additional time, small firn granules become larger by recrystallizing into interlocking ice crystals through pressure, partial melting, and refreezing. When the ice is deep enough, the pressure from burial under many layers of snow and firn will cause the ice below to become plastic and flow outward or downward away from the area of greatest snow and ice accumulation.
Glaciers can be classified into two general groups: alpine glaciers and ice sheets. Alpine glaciers form on mountainsides and move downward through valleys. Sometimes they create valleys by pushing dirt, soil, and other materials out of their way. These glaciers are found on every continent except Australia.
Those that are confined by the rock walls of the valley they occupy may also be called as valley glaciers. A related glacial type called a Piedmont glacier forms when a glacier flows beyond its valley or flatter land and spreads out in a broad lobe shape because the bedrock walls no longer confine it. Some alpine glaciers, however, do not reach the valleys below the zone of high peaks. Instead, they occupy a distinctive steep-sided amphitheater-like depressions eroded by ice flow at the head of the valley, called as cirques, and are known as cirque glaciers. Cirque glaciers are the smallest type of glaciers.
Ice sheets, unlike alpine glaciers, are not limited to mountainous areas. They form broad domes and spread out from their centers in all directions. As ice sheets spread, they cover everything around them with a thick blanket of ice, including valleys, plains, and even entire mountains. The largest ice sheets are called continental glaciers. They cover vast areas, including most of Antarctica and the island of Greenland.
The second and largest type of glacier, far more extensive than the valley glaciers, is the continental ice sheet. At one time, continental ice sheets covered as much as 30% of the Earth's land area. Glaciers can be divided into two functional parts: a zone of accumulation and zone of ablation. The upper portion of the glacier where snowfall exceeds ablation is the zone of accumulation. The lower elevation portion of an alpine glacier where ablation exceeds snowfall is the zone of ablation. Under the force of gravity or pressure from ice thickness, glacial ice flows from the snowy, cooler zone of accumulation to warmer, less snowy zone of ablation. Downslope movement is seen in the development of a great crack or crevasse known as a berg strand. Here you can see the picture of the berg strand. The crevices formed on the back of the glacier is known as berg strand around the head of an alpine glacier. It shows that ice mass is pulling away from the confining rock walls of the cirque, moving outward and downward. The end of a glacier, its terminus or snout, it marks the farthest extent of glacier. If the terminus reaches the sea, it will calve into icebergs. This picture shows a typical type of glacier. You can see the amphitheater-like structure, and it moves along a slope and forming a crevices, and at the back of the head wall there is huge crevices or the cavities which are called as berg strand. The mechanics by which a glacier flows are very complex. Most ice movement in a valley glacier, however, is related to downslope gravitation pull, and all glaciers flow in response to ice pressure over it. Glacial flow occurs through a combination of processes, one of which is basal slip. The sliding of ice over a bedrock floor is called as basal slip. Melt water, which reduces friction through lubrication, and hydrostatic pressure and steep slopes are both involved in this kind of glacier movement. Basal slip is important in middle latitude glaciers, particularly during the summer when much of the glaciers is near its melting point and meltwater is available. During winter and in polar climate, glaciers with little meltwater available, the glacier may freeze into the bedrock and basal slip may be prevented. And another type of movement is internal plastic deformation. Internal plastic deformation is the dominant process by which the ice in the glacier flows. At depth, the tremendous weight of ice causes ice crystals to arrange themselves in parallel layers that glide over each other, much like a deck of cards. This type of flow occurs when a threshold pressure is exceeded, causing the ice to flow through plastic deformation. This generally occurs only under about 30 meters of ice in an area within a glacier, and extending to its space known as the zone of plastic flow. Next, we move on to the important topic, it is glaciers as agent of gradation or agent of denudation. As a glacier moves over the land, whether as an ice sheet or an alpine glacier, it scrapes through the land surface, picking up and carrying boulders and rock fragments. This erosive process of lifting and incorporating rocks and soils into a glacier is called glacial plucking. Weathering, particularly the freezing of water in bedrock joints and fractures, breaks rocks fragments loose, encouraging plucking. Glaciers also drag rock fragments along their base. Abrasive rock fragments traveling on the bed of glaciers become tools of erosion as they scrape and gouge stationary bedrock. The striations, that is the grooves and scratches and gouges made in the rock base, these are known as striations. These striations produced by such glacial abrasion, as this erosion process is called, provide evidence of previous glaciation in areas that are devoid of glaciers today. Striations in the bedrock indicate the direction of flow long after a glacier has disappeared. Bedrock obstructions subjected to intense glacial abrasion are typically smoother and more rounded than those produced by plucking. The glacially produced landforms developed on such rock surface is a roche montane, which is a bedrock hill or knob that is smoothly rounded on the upstream side, more subjected to abrasion with the plucking evident on the downstream slide. When a glacier moves over a obstructive mound of rock strata, the upstream erosion will be smoother due to the process of abrasion, while the downstream erosion will be rougher because of the plucking action. So this is the picture. You can see similar to this but entirely opposite in operation is a feature known as crag and tail. Tail is the downstream area and crag is the upstream area, where the upstream area is characterized by plucking and downstream area is characterized by abrasion, which is very smoother erosion. Glacial erosion works headward even as the glacier flows downslope. The headward erosion of a glacier produces a valley head called a cirque head wall that is shaped like a steep-sided bowl or amphitheater. Glacial undercutting of rock walls above the ice level and of the bedrock below, combined with the mechanical weathering and mass movement, increases the size and depth of the bowl, forming a cirque.
When snow collected year on year, it allows on the mountain sides incredibly strong, tightly packed ice. Once there was enough ice, it started to move because the ice at the bottom or the sole of the glacier melts under intense pressure from the weight of the above ice, allowing the ice to move in what's known as rotational slip. Freeze-thaw weathering takes place above the glacier as ice thaws and then refreezes inside cracks or fissures in the rock. Each time water freezes, it expands and widening the cracks in a small amount. Eventually, the rock will burst apart. Stone fragments called scree fall onto the glacier. These rocks join other debris picked up by the ice at the sole of the glacier. As the glacier moves, abrasion kicks in as these stones scrapes along the valley floor.
Lakes that form in a cirque depression after the ice melts are called tarns or cirque lakes. Often, two or more cirques develop on adjoining side of a mountain. As the cirques are valleys of two adjacent glaciers enlarge, the bedrock ridge between them will be shaped into a jagged, smooth, sawtooth-shaped spine of rock called reed. Where three or more cirques meet at a mountain summit, they form a characteristic pyramid-like peak called horn. The Matterhorn in Swiss Alps is the world's classic example of an horn. A col is a pass formed by headward erosion of two cirques that have intersected to produce a low saddle in a high mountain ridge or arete. Unlike streams which initially erode V-shaped valleys, glaciers erode characteristically steep-sided U-shaped valley called glacier troughs or simply U-shaped valley because it is shaped like the English letter U. In addition, a glacier's tendency to flow straight ahead rather than to meander around causes it to straighten out the pre-existing valley that it occupies. By eroding weaker rocks on the valley floor, alpine glaciers typically create a sequence of rock steps and excavated basins. During glaciation, crevasses will be present at the steps as well as ice falls if the break in slope is steep. The result is a type of topography on the valley floor called as glacial stairway. When the ice recedes, rock-bound lakes may fill the basins, often looking like a beads connected by glacial stream flowing down the glacial trough. Such lake chains are called paternoster lakes. Most valley glaciers have tributary glaciers that merge into them. These tributary glaciers, like the main ice stream, also carve U-shaped channels. However, because these tributaries have less ice volume than the main glaciers, they also have lower rates of erosion and less ability to erode their channel. However, because these tributaries have less volume than the main glaciers, they also have lower rates of erosion and less ability to erode their channels. As a result, their troughs are smaller and not as deep as those of main glaciers. Nevertheless, these higher troughs, higher U-shaped valleys, looks like hanging in the main trough or main U-shaped valley. These higher troughs, typically no longer occupied by a tributary glacier, is called a hanging valley. So it looks like hanging over the main glacier U-shaped valley. A stream that flows down such a channel will drop down to the low glacial valley by high waterfall or a series of steep rapids. Yosemite Falls and Bridal Wheel Falls in Yosemite National Park are excellent examples of waterfalls cascading out of hanging valleys. Glaciers flowing into the sea calve icebergs. As a coastal glacier recedes landward, the ocean invades the abandoned glacial U-shaped valley, creating a deep, narrow inlet of the sea called as fjord. Unlike streams, which can erode only up to a base level, glaciers can erode below the sea level also. So the sea can flow into the U-shaped valleys after the ice melts. This is the typical characteristic of a fjord. Many fjords formed during times of large-scale Pleistocene glaciation, when sea level was lower, and were later submerged as sea level rose with melting of glaciers. World's famous fjords can be seen in the coastal areas of Norway. Next, we move on to the depositional landforms produced by alpine glaciation or alpine glaciers. A glacier can carry debris on its surface, frozen into its interior and dragged along at its base. The load that glaciers can transport and deposit includes boulders, rocks, and fragments plucked by glaciers from their channel sides and floor, as well as smaller fragments and particles produced by abrasion. Rock falls from steep side walls also supply a glacier with debris. Glacial deposits can include a mix of huge chunks of bedrock, pebbles, cobbles, sand, fine rock floor, layers of pollen, dead trees, other plants, soils, and volcanic ash. All glacial deposits are included within the general term drift. Whether they are unsorted and unstratified ice deposits or orderly deposits of meltwater streams issuing from glaciers. To differentiate these two types of deposits, the term till is applied to unsorted drift laid down by ice. Glaciofluvial deposits refers to better sorted and stratified sediments deposited by meltwater. Glaciers deposit a portion of their load when their capacity is reduced. Landforms constructed from glacial deposits, typically ridges formed along the margins of glaciers, are called moraines. Till deposits along the side margins of glaciers form depositional ridges called lateral moraines. Where two tributary glaciers form together, their conjoining lateral moraines merge downstream to form a medial moraine in a center of main glacier. At the snout of a glacier, that is at the end of the glacier, debris carried forward by the conveyor belt of ice are pushed ahead of the glacier is deposited in a jumped heap of rocks and fine materials, forming a curved deposition ridge called as end moraine. End moraines that mark the farthest advance of the glacier are referred to as terminal moraines. A retreating glacier also deposits a great deal of till on the floor of its channels as the ice melts away and leaves its load of drift behind. The hummocky landscape created by these glacial till deposits is called ground moraines. Braided meltwater stream laden with sediments commonly issue from the glacier terminus. The sediment called glacial outwash. The glacial outwash is deposited beyond the terminal moraine, with larger rocks and debris deposited first, followed downstream by progressively finer particles, often resembling an alluvium fan confined by valley walls. This depositional form left by braided streams is called valley train. Valleys in glaciated regions may be filled to depths of a few hundred meters by outwash or deposits in moraine dam lakes, producing extremely flat valley floors. Drumlins are streamlined features aligned along the direction of ice flow. Drumlins allow the direction of ice flow to be determined from their shape, as they typically form with the blunt end pointing upstream. They are large scale features and typically dimensions of a drumlin are 80 to 100 meter high and 1 to 2 kilometer long. Drumlins tend to have a blunt upstream and a longer tapered downstream end. They are typically found in groups known as drumlin fields. Drumlins can be formed from either bedrock or sediment, and they may have a core of different composition of their upstream end. Eskers are often found together with drumlins and are thought to form in arch channels and glacial beds, although they can also form in subaerial channels. So these are the depositional features created by the glacier. So this is the end of today's class. We will be meeting with the next interesting topic in the next class. Bye for now.